This is a video of my family playing Just Dance on my cousin's Nintendo Switch during Lunar New Year. There are my mom and grandma. Tender, awkward, and earnest family fun.
This, meanwhile, is how I usually play video games. This picture speaks for itself. Now, the important thing to get across here is that neither of these are better than the other, but they are fundamentally different ways of playing video games. And it's not just a matter of multiplayer versus single player. In the PC game I'm playing, especially if it's an MMO, sometimes I'm playing with more people than you can even fit into the same room as a Nintendo Switch. It goes deeper than that. One way of playing is more social than the other. It invites people to play, gathers spectators in the living room to watch.
The other is more solitary, maybe asks more focus of the player, and relies on action sequences and first-person views. These are just two of the gaming scenes available to players today, but I remember in 2007, it seems like that's all there was.
In 2007, gaming as a genre was being pushed forward by narrative-driven shooters, first-person action games, and games with a competitive scene, particularly. At the center stage of the resistance to this graphics shader-heavy, video games as a movie, competitive online multiplayer kind of movement was the Nintendo Wii. At a time when the top-selling games of the day were all like this, Nintendo was trying to create a different kind of console. In the best kind of way, the Nintendo Wii took the idea of social gameplay to its natural extreme, creating not just games that fostered social environments, but a wide, accepting console for people who weren't in the demographic of young men aged 18 to 34. A worldwide welcome into the fold of video games for non-gamers everywhere. This, as Nintendo called it, was the revolution. Project Revolution. The year is 2006, and the biggest players in gaming are the Xbox and the PS3. Steam exists, but it's not as popular, and it looks like this, so let's just not talk about it. Both consoles launched within a year of each other, and were graphics-heavy monsters of machinery. As if to make a point, the US Air Force bought over 1,000 PS3s in 2010, and, no shit, used them to make a supercomputer. The resolutions were crisp, and the gaming magazines of the day would praise games on these platforms for their shaders, lighting, and use of graphics.
It's against this environment that Nintendo announced the Wii, codenamed Project Revolution. The Wii was already a different console when it hit US market in 2007.
It was the first console to use motion control gameplay, but it wasn't always perfect. Also, it was significantly less powerful than its competitors, with resolution not going past 480p. And then they had these commercials.
We would like to play.
Yeah, and I would like to eat dinner. Who are you? Japanese businessmen invading my home aside, these could have been huge disadvantages in the coming console wars, but Nintendo wasn't aiming at the same audiences as Sony and Microsoft. Here's where we're going to tackle some of the design philosophies behind the Wii's hardware, mainly accessibility and social ability.
Let's start with accessibility. The Nintendo Wii was designed to reach people who didn't typically play video games.
It was meant to be easy to pick up and fun to control with.
And the console design reflects this. The motion controls were chosen because they were the most intuitive to pick up. You want to swing a tennis racket? You don't press the B button while holding right stick and right trigger. You just swing your remote like a tennis racket. You want to slash this guy with your sword? You just have to treat it like it's a sword. The Wii Remote is great for this because of the way its simple design interacts with the motion controls, making the controller is the perfect metaphor for basically anything you could have in-game.
And he's right. Think about it. A sword, a lightsaber, a gun, a scalpel, a pencil, a driving wheel, boxing gloves, bow and arrow. 9 times out of 10, you pretty much know how the game wants you to control any one of these things, just by looking at it. You didn't have to learn how to enjoy the game. It was just as familiar as playing with a futuristic TV remote. Even the low-powered graphics were a design choice. Nintendo game director and surprised uncle Shigeru Miyamoto described the Wii in terms of natural selection, insisting that power isn't everything for a console. Too many powerful consoles can't coexist. It's like having only ferocious dinosaurs. They might fight and hasten their own extinction. So what looks like a major disadvantage ended up being a major selling point. The Wii was a relatively cheap console. Nintendo built the Wii out of readily available stock hardware, so because they didn't have as many custom parts, they were able to lower the cost of the unit. At launch, the Nintendo Wii retailed at $250. By the end of its life cycle, it was retailing for $110. The low-powered CPUs in the Wii allowed it to use less electricity too. To give you an idea of scale, the PS3 used $134 in electricity to power each year. The Xbox used $103. The Wii used just $10 each year. And keep in mind, the Wii never really turned off. It just did that weird red light thing. In terms of accessibility, the cheaper the console, the more people who can afford to play it. As Nintendo Japan put their strategy, they were marketing to moms. And although that comment hasn't really aged well, the sentiment behind it was right. They wanted to expand the audience of video games beyond the audience of young men ages 18 to 34 who were already being heavily marketed to by Xbox and PS3, the quote-unquote hardcore gamers. Marketing to families, kids, women, and senior citizens was their bread and butter. In fact, they were so successful that Wii Bowling is still one of the most popular activities in retirement homes today. So you made a popular console. That's not special in its own right. Now that you've got all these people playing it, how do you get them to talk to each other?
Now let's switch topics and consider the social aspects of the Wii as a platform. Because now that you've got all these people playing it, how do you get them to talk to each other? The genius of the Wii was that because of the novel motion controls, it wasn't just easy and fun to play. It also becomes something fun to watch people play. When you play the Wii, you take up a lot of space and make some very silly movements sometimes. It's very entertaining, especially when you think that grandma or mom or dad could be doing it too. Even when the motion controls get bad, it's fun to watch.
Ah yeah, this is the stuff. Multiplayer on the Wii wasn't especially good or better than anything on Xbox or PS3. In fact, some people would argue that it's blatantly worse. But even if it's not very quote-unquote serious multiplayer, it's a ton of fun to just be shaking your Wii remote next to somebody else on the couch, screaming and yelling and turning red, until you finally win that race with the cow in Wii Play. Even though it takes no skill and Chris is still a fucking cheater. But this was an intentional part of Nintendo's design philosophy, and it panned out. I remember so many times growing up when 2 people playing the Wii turned into 3, then 4, then my mom watching too, just as we made complete idiots of ourselves in front of the living room TV. They were good times.
Even when Sony came out with the PlayStation Move in 2010 and Kinect came out in 2011, those two never really caught on, I argue, because they weren't designed with the social platform aspect in mind.
Sure, you've got the same technology now and similar knockoff titles, but you are missing the ecosystem. The Wii's thing was motion control gaming and fun couch co-op. There's a clear difference between the platform and the people it's trying to market to, especially when you have more hardcore titles like Resistance Fall of Man alongside these motion control titles. And what are these, like fake Miis? Like when they were ripping it off, they forgot to rip off the good parts. They didn't really nail this one, I don't know.
I mean, come on! If a second guy wanders into your Kinect background while you are trying to play, suddenly you are moving the wrong direction, or shooting the wrong guy.
So was the Wii really what it set out to be? Was it a revolution? I have my personal gripes with the Wii from growing up with it. Its motion control wasn't always one-to-one, I often felt the envy of greater graphics machines, and for some reason every game had one of these sequences. This. I think the answer largely depends on whether or not you were a part of that revolution. Whether or not you went out and bought a Wii, or if that was your first game console, or if by virtue of having a Wii, you got somebody to play video games who usually didn't. But I'll just end with this. In April of 2017, Dave Thier, a senior contributor to Forbes, decided to take a Nintendo Switch to a bar, just to see if it really was the social platform Nintendo wanted it to be. The Switch, which borrowed so much from the Wii in terms of motion control gaming and being a social platform. For the first hour that he's in the bar in this article, he set up his Switch on the bar, and people are just kind of milling about, being like, who's this weirdo who has a Nintendo Switch at a bar? And then after the first hour, somebody asks if it's a Switch and asks to play. By the third hour, everybody's walking up to the Switch like it's a carnival ride, challenging each other to grudge matches in Mario Kart, and laughing and hooting and hollering and having a good time and exchanging numbers and names. It's video games, bringing people together, and bringing together people who don't always play video games, or don't always play them in public. If you were to ask me if that was a revolution, I'd say the revolution is alive and well, and it started in 2007.